Thank you, brother.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, great to be here. Let me bring you guys back a few years to the fall of 1990. And I woke up in the morning and, man, I just had this terrible knot in my stomach, like just this grind. Have you guys ever maybe felt that when you're going to have a difficult conversation with maybe a coworker or pretty much any conversation with a teenager? You know what I'm talking about? You got it kind of, yeah, it starts right there. And I get up out of my rack and I put on my flight suit and I zip it up and I'm walking down the passageway and I step out and I get ready to go to work and I go through a big metal door and I step out onto a steel grate and I'm looking down 60 feet below me and the ocean is crashing by. And I take a turn to my right and I step up 3 steps and I step up onto the flight deck of the U.S. Independence. And as soon as I do that, this hot wind, it's 7 in the morning, it's already 110 degrees, hits me in the face and it's just filled with jet fuel and hydraulic fluid and it just has a very particular scent to it. And man, that knot in my gut just got even tighter. And here's why. Because I looked across the flight deck and here's was my office. Can we switch that over? Here's my office for the day. My F-14 Tomcat. And for the first time ever in my life, as I looked at this, it was loaded with live bombs and missiles. And it just got real because today was going to be my first flight into combat. And I knew that everything that I did, my wingman over here, his life was going to depend on my decisions. And guys, I'm new at this. And every decision he makes, my life could depend on that. Any veterans in here? Raise your hands. Thank you guys so much for your service. One of the missions we were briefed on that could be called into today was something called close air support. So imagine you see the troops on the ground, and they're in contact, and they call for the fighters to come in and take out the enemy. And we're talking every decision in that environment is life and death. And all this is weighing on my head as I'm looking over at my jet, and what do you do when you feel completely unprepared to move forward? So what I did is I just kind of fell back in my training and I started going through my checklist and I climb up in that cockpit and I get the engines started, and as they're roaring to life, I'm just alone with this self-doubt that is nagging me for just a moment. And all of a sudden the flight deck crew comes out in front of my jet and they wave me forward. And all of a sudden, I start taxiing toward the catapult. And as I taxi up to the catapult, what happens is you actually, there's a thing on our nose gear called a launch bar, and it locks down into the catapult. And then that airplane cannot move, even at full power, not until they launch us at this point. And I look down at the flight deck officer, and he gives me this symbol, which is go to 100% power. And I bring the throttles all the way up. And there's a group of about 5 or 6 young men running around this airplane at full power, making sure that everything's ready to go and nothing's leaking and all the weapons are on tight. Mad respect for the folks that did that job. I mean, they're inches away from the intake of an engine at full power on a fighter. And then I get the signal from this guy down here and he does this. And that is to go to zone 5 afterburner. And I take those throttles that are at full power and I push them outboard and I push them all the way up. And now we are burning 2,000 pounds of fuel per minute. And that airplane is shuddering and shaking and rattling and rolling. And I look down in my cockpit, and the last thing I have to do before they launch me is I have to give the flight deck officer a salute. And what do you think is going on in my head right before I have to raise my hand for the first time to go into combat? What are you guys saying? What would go through your head? Should have gone to the bathroom. Here was my first thought. I couldn't raise my arm because I'm like, don't launch. Don't launch. I am not ready for this. This is not happening right now. And evidently, I must have raised my hand because they fired me off the front of this flight deck, 0 to 150 miles an hour in 2.4 seconds. And I am now climbing away to join my flight to get together and press into Iraq for the first time. But I got to tell you, as I'm climbing up and I'm focused on what's ahead of me, I actually started thinking in that moment, what has allowed me at 23 or 24 years old to be in this position and be able to do that? You know what it was for me? It was some amazing mentors in my life. Men and women, my dad, my coaches, people that saw things in me that I didn't see in myself at the time. People that actually started to believe in me until I started to believe in myself more. People that challenged me to do things that I didn't think I was ready to do. And what I realized in that moment, flying up there, is, you know what? I'm going to go do my best, because that's what I can do. What can I control and what can I control? And I had to focus on some of those things. And there's some lessons that I've learned in my life going through that, because as I got out of the military and got into business, Jamie mentioned that I did get orders to go to Top Gun. That was a dream come true, and this is where some things started to change in my life. So I get called into the stateroom. The commanding officer's like, first of all, you don't want to get a call from the commanding officer to come to a stateroom, by the way. And his call sign was Darth, for Darth Vader. Donna knows him very well. He's 6'5", and you don't want to be on his bad side. Trust me, if you're over here, bad. And I get called to a stateroom, and I get told that I'm going to be the guy selected to go to Top Gun. I don't even remember what happened next. I floated down to my stateroom, and the next weekend I'm playing softball, and I get hit with a line drive in the right eye, and I'm done. I had nerve damage, and I lost my medical. And 6 months later, I'm out on the street trying to figure out what's next in my life. It was brutal. When your identity is completely rooted in everything external, who you are, what you do, what they call you, guess what? My faith and my foundation was I had allowed it to be put in things that can be taken away from me. And they all were. Now in that, I met a guy at a bookstore, and he said, hey, he was a school principal, but he started mentoring me, trying to help me kind of rebuild a vision and a dream. And it was this person that actually led me to my faith in Jesus. And I saw the power. God used that for me to see the power of bringing our faith out into the world, not just in the church. The church for me is a place where I go to get equipped and encouraged so that I can go out in the world and be a positive influence and an impact player. Because I wanted to not just have success in my life, however you define success. I also wanted to do something significant, something meaningful. I didn't really know what that was. God has always called me into leadership roles. And I want to share something with all of you, and that's this. Here's what the leadership world focuses on. And there's people that made their entire career on each one of these topics. And they're very valid, so don't, right? I'm not saying these are wrong. But we focus on the why and the what and the how. But there's something completely foundational that we often miss. I could sit here and Keith and Scotty, two pastors, my pastors here, and I could say, hey, I want to plant a church. I want to build a business. And you could give me your best insight, your best mentorship, your best knowledge. Do you think it's possible I wouldn't get your results? You guys ever seen that happen? And that's because we forget about who we are. Who is absolutely foundational? Are we the best version of ourselves? Are we the person? There's a big difference between the person I think that you see in the mirror and the person God sees when he looks at us. Our limiting beliefs, the paradigms that we've let in because of our experience in the world, the lies that maybe we've accepted about ourselves as the truth. Like, as a matter of fact, I was a chubby, bullied kid before I got big. Right? I was the little short, fat kid. And I'll never, in a speaking class in ninth grade, I'll never forget the teacher, after I stuttered and stumbled and completely embarrassed myself at a 5-minute speech I had to give. He said to me, John, I hope you don't pick a career where you have to speak. Right? But you know what? When you're a kid, that stuff sinks in. I literally would get nauseous and almost throw up if I had to speak to a group when I was younger. Is that true? Is that a truth? No, it was a lie that I accepted as the truth about me, though. So here's the thing. Let's use a little bit of a metaphor. Last time you guys were flying and you're up at altitude and the crew has the autopilot on, right? What percent of time do you guys think that airplane is on course? What do you think? What would you guess? 3/4. Who else? 80. Okay, wow, you guys are really optimistic. The answer is 3. That plane is only on course 3% of the time. But now think about it. There's turbulence that you guys feel at altitude. You know, those are big wind gusts like you have outside. It's blowing the plane off course. And the engines are turning. And people are getting up to use the bathroom. And they're wheeling the cord up and down. Everything is constantly throwing that airplane out of balance. But the autopilot has to know a couple things to be able to make a correction. And it's no different than our own lives. Right? We are constantly being pushed off course by things that happen in the world, happen to us, happen in here. And we have to know, just like an autopilot, how to correct. And there's 3 elements of this, okay? Here's the first one is, you have to know your own true north. An autopilot has to have a navigational reference to set an initial course and then to also be able to make a course correction. Second thing it has to know, think about, you take out your cell phone. What's the first thing you do when I was going to come here today? I take out Apple Maps, and what do? I type in the destination. It's not going to be much use to me unless I tell it where I want to go. And what's the other thing that you have to do? The GPS, and this is why I don't use Waze anymore. If any of you guys work for Waze, I really apologize. But it has to know the present position. Waze never knows where I am for like the first minute. And I always take the wrong turn out of the lot, and then I'm like, I'm behind, and now I got to add 5 minutes because I went the wrong way. But we have to know where we're at as a person. What are our values, our beliefs, and our passions? And we're going to walk through some of these things on this worksheet here. I just want to go through these here real quickly. Think about this as a true north. For me, where I've been on this faith journey really the last 10 years, I love this quote from A.W. Tozer. What comes to our minds when we think about God, the nature of God, is one of the most important things about us. I'm going to share with you a little bit about my journey and my understanding. All right, that. And I had to figure out, who did God create me to be? What am I meant to do in business and in the world? I love business. I love building teams. I love creating jobs. How does that relate to anything spiritual or scriptural? I had to like reconcile some of these things for myself. Okay? I had to slow down and find some of this stuff out to really be able to speed up. Because in this crazy, hyper busy, over caffeinated world, and I was working 80 hours a week, and that was a badge of honor for me, what I realized was, in the pursuit of how they defined success, how they expected me to show up, I was sacrificing the relationship with my wife and my kids and any kind of semblance of joy or happiness. Okay, we'll talk about how to fix all that. The other one is, what's our destination? I mean, the road to get there, it's pretty windy and a little bit crazy sometimes. And just think about this. Does your destination, what you're doing right now, match up with where you want to go? Because if we don't have a plan, maybe said a little differently, if we haven't really reached out to God and gotten His insight on what we're doing and why we're doing it and who we are, then guess what? Somebody else is determining where we are going. Either we partner with God to go where we are meant to go, or we let somebody else determine that for us. Okay? And here's what I think is, whatever the age, there's a whole bunch of group in here that I can tell there's young people, there's people in here that are probably retired. It doesn't matter what age you are at, because I had to start over a few years ago from scratch. We can always make a difference, especially, I think, when we're in a community of like-minded leaders in partnership with God. Okay? And here's another big question that I had to ask myself is this: who am I? Who am I really? Because there was a massive gap between my real self and my ideal self. And I had to close this gap. I didn't know how to close it. I'm going to share with you guys how I did that. And here's what I found is finding this identity is a process. It's not something you don't go to a weekend workshop. Because I tried that and it was expensive. And I was like, Donna's like, really? You spent that much on that weekend? Yeah, sorry, honey. I might do it again though. So here, if you guys on your notes, you have this box. I'm an engineer, by the way. I'm an electrical engineer. So I have to do something with a graph, okay? So let me show you this here a little bit. Here's what I came up with. Here's the first thing on the bottom here. It's about your passions. This is our heart. This gives us the energy to move towards something meaningful in our life. And there's an exercise in there that you guys can go through, and I would have you start writing down your passions and comparing them and see which rises to the top. Quick example. I was sitting with a client of mine. I do a lot of coaching. And I said, what are you passionate about? He goes, fly fishing. I'm like, really? Okay, fly fishing it is. What is it about fly fishing? He goes, man, when I'm fly fishing, that's my time to be alone with God and nature, and I'm just connected, and I'm hearing stuff. Okay, great, write that down too. Like meaningful, you having alone time with God out in nature. What else is going on when you're fly fishing? Oh man, I love bringing up one or two of my friends, and we dig deep into things that matter. So you're also passionate about having meaningful conversations with people and kind of mentoring people. He says, yes. I said, what else? He goes, I love guiding for Healing Waters. They work with wounded vets and bring them up to the mountains and teach them how to fly fish. And he goes, the best thing in the world is you see this guy who, he's an amputee, but first time he ever caught a fish, and we're taking that picture. And I said, are you passionate about teaching somebody a skill, seeing them apply it and be successful in it in a way that's meaningful to them? He goes, oh my gosh, yeah. So we started looking at all these passions. By the way, he was the CEO of a company and used this to completely recast his role in that company. And in doing that, the company is now doubled, okay? Because he was doing what he thought he should do before versus what he was designed and gifted to do. Here's the other part, is this. On the other side is your equipping. I think it's good to understand what are your gifts, talents, strengths, those things that you've practiced, you're worked at. And that gives you the how to move up and to the right, which is really connecting to a life fully alive. Okay? If you guys think about John 10:10, it says, Jesus said, I came to give you life so that you may live it to the full. Let's say a full life is a 10 out of 10, and you're like barely hanging on, about to check out, and that's a 1. Okay? Where are you on that scale? Most of us would probably tell our friends, because I've done this in public groups, people rate themselves at about a 7 to a 9. Do you know what people rate themselves when I talk to them individually, one-on-one, without the influence of a group? A 3 to a 5. Okay? Because we all want to think we want others to think we're doing okay. So here's but you guys can rate this for yourself. Here's where I was 10 years ago before that accident. I was working for a Wall Street firm, and I was probably at about a 7 using my equipping, and I was probably in my passions at about a 3. Right? 7 times 3 is 21. Look at all that I was laying on the table. No, I was at a place 10 years ago that I would describe as smoldering discontent. I was miserable, even though I was meeting all the measures of success of what the world said you should be good, you should be happy. Right? Don and I were right there together. We were not happy. What? 10 times 10 is 100. 79% I'm leaving on the table. So let's think about this. This is you. How do we get to understand ourselves? This is the who. Our core values are critical. It's who you be versus what you do. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to move up and to the right. I wanted to move up and to the right. And I had to figure out, how do I do that? And this is something you could do as your takeaway as you're looking at all these things. What does a +1 look like for you? If you did your own chart, do you think it's more important for you to maybe move more into your gifts and skills and talents right now in this season? Or maybe it's more important to move a little bit toward your right and a little bit more into your passions. I wanted to focus on those small steps that just kept me moving toward that full life. I had to figure out what that was. And here's what I found is all of a sudden I expanded my envelope. And it was a 9 out of 9. And I got to tell you, like, my life right now is amazing. My marriage is amazing. My relationship with my kids and my friends and what I get to do in the world and all over the world. I never thought I'd get to do a few years ago. And when I kind of started getting close to this boundary, all of a sudden God goes, hey, watch this. As I started to transform, he totally exploded what is possible in partnership with him in the world. A couple years ago when we got named as a small company working out of my house, the preferred leadership trainer to the U.S. Air Force. I'm like, okay, that is God. When we got named the top 12 podcasts by Inc. magazine and the only faith-based podcast on their list, I'll guarantee you, this is my opinion, they never listened to it. There's no way they listened to my podcast. Somebody gave them my name and they didn't do due diligence and we got on the list. That was God. Trust me. Okay? So let me bring you back a little bit, a couple minutes, and just tell you a little bit of a story. So 10 years ago, this was when everything really changed for me. I was invited up to a ranch in Montana for a ministry that I was supporting called Family Talk, and we were going to go horseback riding to the back of this property and have lunch. And I was the first one saddled. Any horse people in here? Okay, you can probably look at that picture and see that horse does not like me. And I'm holding on to this bar because he kept walking back and forth, and I couldn't get him to stop. So all of a sudden, he just bolts and he takes off, and I'm laying flat on my back, and this rump is pounding me in the shoulder blades, and I did the one thing that I knew to do in the moment. And that was just squeeze with my legs as hard as I possibly could so I didn't flip off the back of the horse and get killed. And what am I telling the horse? Go faster. Yes. And he responded. That guy found another gear. I didn't know a horse could go this fast. Like, guys, I've been in combat. I've been shot at. I've raised 3 teenagers. I have a grandson from a high schooler. Nothing prepared me for that moment at all. I literally started panicking and thinking, I got to get this horse. If I get off this horse, I'm going to die, and I don't want to die. And next thing I know, I'm 20 yards in front of the fence, and then that's the last thing I remember. The horse came to the fence at a full gallop, and he bucked so hard, he flipped over, slammed in the fence rump first, and he launched me Superman into a 3-inch steel pole beam, just like you see there. And I crushed the entire left side of my skull. This was caved in. I broke every bone in my skull except my jaw and my cheekbone. I lost 8 teeth. I broke my neck. I shattered my shoulder. The next bar down crushed my rib cage, and I had broken ribs puncture my left lung. And I woke up on the ground into more pain than I could ever describe to you. You know that saying, God won't give you more than you can handle? Not true. It's not in Scripture either. You are right. He won't give you more than he can handle. That's a lot. Now, in that moment, all of a sudden, as I'm yelling and writhing around and screaming, I don't even know I'm doing this, one of the guys who were there said, all of a sudden, John, we just watch you just sink into the ground and stop moving. And I thought we just watched somebody die. Now, it was in that moment that all of a sudden I was in God's presence and he was standing right here next to me. And what was flowing off of him, what was pouring off of him with a physical weight to it, like being at the edge of an ocean and the beach and the waves are coming up washing over your body, was unconditional love. Like I had never experienced in my life, because as soon as I felt it laying there, I didn't even know how bad my body was crushed. My first thought was, I'm not worthy of somebody loving me like this. And what I knew in that moment was anything and everything I had ever done in my life, good, bad, or otherwise, was not even relevant to this relationship, unconditional love that God has with me right now in the present. And I'd never experienced that from a person before, right? And you know what? I woke up while I was laying there, and after I felt this unconditional love, all the pain and panic and fear I was in was completely taken away, and then I heard God's voice. And it was a voice that came from everywhere and nowhere, and it was not to my ears. It was like this consciousness flowing right through the middle of me. And the first thing he said to me was, all things work together for good for those that love the Lord. And folks, I did not know that that was from Romans, by the way. That's not where I was at 10 years ago. And then he said, John, and he used my name, John, I'm going to heal you and use this for my glory. And then he said this, it wasn't a rebuke. It was more, it had a joy to it. And you'll recognize it. He said, the Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And as soon as he said that, I knew my left eye was permanently blind, which it is. All the bones back here shattered and severed the optic nerve. So my left eye is disconnected from my brain, unless God ever heals it in the future. And I woke up and I said, hey, this lady right there in the orange, I said to her, hey, I said, God's here. You don't have to worry. It's going to be okay. She's like, yeah. I mean, this is caved in, right? She's like, I don't think that's how this is going to work out. Even though she's a believer, she did not think I was going to make it the hour until Life Flight showed up. So I spent 5 weeks in ICU, had 2 craniotomies. They had to take my whole skull off twice. And I spent 20 months right down the road here at Craig Hospital with a severe traumatic brain injury. When God said he was going to heal me, I didn't expect it would take, 3 or 4 years. I honestly really didn't. I struggled with some of these things. It was a very difficult journey of 2 things. Discovering the true nature of God. It was the first time I've actually read the Bible cover to cover. And not what I saw in the mirror, but who did God see when he looked at me? And when I answered those 2 questions, if you look back at that chart, the what to do and how to do it became crystal clear. And I tell you, the thing that I think was frustrating me in the past was this. I was always trying to figure out what my assignment was, what I should be doing, what's my why, what's my calling. And I just felt like I never truly connected with it. But once I actually started to understand this relational side of who God was and who I was, all of a sudden it became crystal clear. Okay? And I just want to share with you guys a quote. Okay? When you're talking about what is your next small step, that change does not occur until the pain of staying the same exceeds the pain of change. Right? When I was laying in bed and I realized that, you know what? I should be dead. I shouldn't be here. But I've been given this second chance. I get to completely rewrite my script. How exciting is this? What God showed me is, trust me in all this. Trust me in the small steps. And you know what? This is how I've built my company. My company it's grown internationally. And literally 8 years ago, when I got out of the hospital with a brain injury, I could work about 8 hours a week. All my money was gone because I'd had no income for 2 years and all the expenses. And my network was dormant because I'd been laying in a hospital bed, except for a few friends that would come and visit. And I couldn't work. I couldn't go get a job, so I decided to start what has become Beyond Influence. Small steps every day, trusting God with what happens. And here's also something I realized is this, and this is something I should have known before the accident, and that's this, that every day is a second chance. I've been given a second chance, but I didn't realize it before, that I actually had the power to rewrite my script. And how I got direction, you know what I did since I should have died 10 years ago? I wrote down my epitaph. I actually wrote down my obituary. What is the obituary that I want this beautiful woman here to give someday? And she has never read it. I want to live my life so that those words get said someday. What do I want each of my boys to say? I have 3 sons. What do I want my daughter-in-laws to say? What do I want my coworkers to say? Customers in my company, my clients to say? And I wrote all that down and I shared it with some people very close to me who now are my wingmen, my band of brothers, keeping me on the path that God has laid out in front of me. And it has been transformational to me, okay? So just remember, and if you missed it this morning or you missed it yesterday, don't be filled with fear, guilt, and shame. That kept me away from a beautiful relationship with God. I want you to know all this stuff that lives over here in our heads, it's not even a thought for God in the present over here with you. And in that, what I do know is each person here has the power to make an impact. And whether it's in a life, your family, a company, this city, this church community, this nation, in partnership with the Father. Okay? So with that, guys, go out there, keep knocking them alive out there, and I'd be happy to take any questions y'all have. Keith, give me water.
If you got a question, just give your hand up and we'll come by and there we go.
What's one piece of advice you'd give your younger self sitting in that cockpit today?
Go faster. Back then, I think in that cockpit, here's the advice I would have given myself, because it was amazing work, but it was also a grind. And when I got injured and hit in the eye, the doctor said, you're healing. You're not back to where we could give you your medical back. But if you're willing to wait, you can stay in. I would have had to do what's called a shore tour, and I would have been like a fuels off. I wouldn't have been flying for 2 years. And I looked at that, and I at the time, I didn't have a lot of good mentorship or guidance or wisdom, and it was just Don and I going, well, that would really be horrible. So let's just pull the ripcord and get out. In hindsight, I really wished I would have told my younger self to go find somebody to help you really think through a decision like that and find mentorship and seek God's will, because had I stayed in, one of my best friends just retired as a 3-star admiral. That probably would have been a path I would have had maybe a similar trajectory on. And for me, I know personally that would have been incredibly rewarding. And so mentorship would be a huge piece of advice that I would give to any young person.
So I wanted to ask, what is the number one thing that you think that people miss about mentorship?
When you're approaching somebody to find a mentor, if you focus, in your age, right? Go find somebody that you think that you would love to. How about this? You need to be a fruit inspector. Here's what I mean by that. Right? I got offered to be mentored when I first got out of the military by a guy who was a billionaire. I met him at a thing, and I was talking to my friend Jeff, the guy who led me to my faith. I'm like, oh my gosh, he wants me to join his company, and he wants me to mentor him. Like, oh my gosh, he lives on the water in La Jolla, California. And Jeff's like, okay, well, how's his marriage? Well, he's on his 4th one, so I'm not quite sure. How's his relationship with his kids? They don't like each other. He says, listen, whoever you get advice from, you're going to get what they got. So if you want to be wealthy and lonely and have a really good bourbon collection, then let him mentor you. Your choice. And I passed on it, and the guy was shocked. I think the other thing, too, as a mentee, whenever somebody is letting me in their life to mentor me, my goal is to add value to them. I am constantly trying to find ways to enrich that person's life, to add value, to do whatever I can. Even it's just as simple as, let's just say I'm getting mentored by Scotty, and he gives me some advice, and just to follow up and say, man, I thought about that, and here's what I did, and here's the outcome, and thank you. Or, hey, you told me I need to meet this guy, Jamie, and I just had lunch with him, and you know what, it led to this conversation. But you know what, I think you as the person who's being mentored needs to put in more work than the person who's mentoring you. And when I have been in those kind of relationships, they have been incredibly full and incredibly rich. Yep.
So my question is, it's tied to that in how does this matching come about? If you want to mentor somebody, how do you go about finding that person or people that you're going to do this to? And then if you want to be mentored, how do you find that?
Okay, who here is mentoring somebody? Okay, what is just something you have done to maybe find somebody? What's your name? Jenny, right? Help Jenny. Go ahead.
They find you. Somebody who wants to be mentored says, will you mentor me? Or they start calling you and asking you for advice. So I never look
Awesome. Who else? How have you found somebody to mentor? I saw a whole bunch of hands come up. There was somebody here at this. Go ahead.
It kind of just starts by talking to them in the first place. You got to go meet people and actually get to know them, and then things will kind of arise. It is kind of like she said, they kind of end up coming to you, but maybe you go to them first.
Yeah, he said maybe that you go to them first. You start to have the conversation. Like the guy Jeff who mentored me and led me to faith. Actually, he approached me where I was actually at a bookstore, Jenny. And I was staring completely like in knucklehead at the business book section because none of it made sense to me. And I knew I had to get into business. And I think he looked at me like just kind of like a dog who hears a whistle, like staring at this book section. He goes, "What are you looking for?" And I'm like, "A business book." He goes, "Can you be more specific?" I'm like, "Not really." We started having a conversation, and he reached out to me and says, well, let's grab coffee. And then that led to, and then, you know what? And then we started to reciprocate. And just, here's a quick mentorship story. So I was in college as a junior when the movie Top Gun came out. And I applied to aviation. And we were told right before I'm heading down to flight school that because the movie made it so popular, 1 in every 10,000 people is going to get to fly a fighter. I'm like, oh, man, all the self-doubt just was cratering me. Like, what am I thinking? I'm going to fail. I'm going to embarrass myself. And my dad pulled me aside and gave me some of the best advice ever. He said, John, when you get down there, there's going to be somebody, another student who's ahead of you, so you're not competing with them, because he was military, understood the culture. But he goes, find that guy, because everybody's going to be talking about him. And see if you can have dinner with him and see if he'll share with you what he's doing, because I'll guarantee you he's doing something different. And that guy's name was John Foster. And I met him, and he became a friend, and he showed with me what he was doing, which was very kind of counterintuitive. But with John's mentorship, I graduated not only number 1 in my class, but number 1 in the country. I was able to choose to fly the F-14 out of Virginia Beach. Well, only one guy a year gets to do that. And that was 100%, not only because of mentorship, but also be willing to do what somebody else tells you. I think here's what you do. You go look at somebody who has your success, you be the fruit inspector, and then you go, okay, what did they do to get that? Then the third thing is I have to ask myself a question. Am I willing to do what others are not willing to do and do what they did to get the results? That's a great place of prayer, folks. That's a great place to go into people and going, yeah, I want to start a church. I have an idea. And then guess what? Then you got to step over here and you got to compete and you got to go all in and you got to be willing to fail. And you got to not see failure as anything in your identity. Failure has been a process that taught me what to do next time versus something that proved to me something negative that was rooted in my identity that shouldn't have been there. I had to recast all those things. And that is to keep pressing forward and not giving up. Okay? Hopefully that helps. Yep. Anybody else?
I got one for you.
Yes, sir.
It has nothing to do with, in the way it does, mentoring. You are a true warrior for God now. You weren't always.
True.
It sounds like your children, your sons, are close to God and are good, faithful warriors themselves. How do you get your children who they don't go to church and they just, one of these feels that I don't need to go to church, I can go on a hike. You know, how do you get them back in to believe it? Was it your faith that brought them back in, or was it what brought your family tighter together?
Great question. So how do you be a parent of a prodigal? Is that kind of what you're asking? Because that actually describes all of my children. My oldest son, John, failed out of the School of Mines. Totally got into drugs and sex, and it was bad. And I'm not saying that out of school. If he was there, he's now been all around the world sharing his testimony, but he was in a really, really bad place. And he came home one day, and I said, you know what? We loved him unconditionally. We didn't condone what he did, but the only thing I knew how to do was just keep going back to Jesus and saying, how how do I be there for him? He didn't like going to church, so I guess what we do on Sundays is we'd go on the hike with him. And we developed a relationship. And what he did is he saw, though, me going through my life and how hard it was. And when you have a brain injury, that affects your emotional controls, the first 2 or 3 years were really difficult for my wife and my kids. I was not the person you see up here, trust me. There was a lot of damage done. And it was through that God just built our relationships. And in that relationship, because think about it, God doesn't want to lose any of those kids that you're talking about, right? But what does he do? That prodigal in Luke, we think of that. But when he wanted all the money and he went out to go spend it on wine and women, and did the old man follow him and chastise him? Tell him you're wrong and you're crazy? No, you know what he did? He let him go make his own decisions, and he loved him enough until he came back. Remember that? As soon as he saw him, he sees him down the road, which always strikes me. He was coming up the road, and the father was actually, imagine every day looking down the road, hoping that today is the day I see my son, with all the bad stuff he's done. And Don and I wanted to be the parents that just loved our kids unconditionally and worked on our own faith. And in that, it actually created openings for conversation. And then God gave my wife an idea of talking about my son about going on Youth with a Mission, YWAM. And he ended up signing up for it and went on a 9-month DTS, which transformed his life. And then he became a witness to my middle son, who got a classmate pregnant in high school and decided to keep the baby, and it was really, really hard. He's now a 22-year-old single dad with a 4.5-year-old. And we did the same thing with Michael, and we loved him unconditionally. And we walked with him every step of the journey, and in that, it has given us relationships with our boys. And then last night, my youngest son had some serious self-doubt about who he was, his identity, and we had the relationship where he approached Donna. Do I have time to tell a quick story on how we created an environment? Okay, here's a quick story. So I knew that I had caused all this damage, and I knew that my upbringing as a kid, I was bringing in some bad parenting habits into my current relationships. Here's an example. I'm walking through the family room, and I look outside, and the grass is long, and Michael is sitting on the couch. And I look at Michael, and I said, hey, Michael, I need to have you mow the lawn today. And he looks up at me, and he goes, no. Okay, what are you guys thinking right now? Well, no, what's the thought? What's coming up? Kill him. I'm going to kill him. Get out. How dare you? Okay, good. So so we're in good company here. How about the feeling? What feeling? What are you guys feeling right now? Joy, happiness. He's feeling joy and happiness. No. Anger? All right, I went past anger to rage, guys, because that was my habit. What was my action that I took? This is how our brain works, by the way. There's an event. There's a thought. Thought leads to a feeling. We source our actions from feelings, folks. It's how God designed our brain. But the action was a very high volume conversation, and I got him to mow the lawn. Was that my goal? Was my goal to build a relationship with my kid or get chores done? I'm like, I don't know how to change this. God, show me how to change this. This is a terrible cycle that I don't know how to get out of. Here's what God shared with me. It's like, okay, it's going to happen again. Trust me. More than once. Grass is going to grow back. I'm going to ask Michael, how do you want to think? What do you want to think? What would that thought sourced from a place of an amazing relationship? I said, okay, I would love to think this is an amazing opportunity for me to mentor my son, because soon he's going to be an adult, and I want him to be my best friend as we do life together after he's 18 years old. Okay. How do you want to feel other than anger? This is post my accident. I'm like, oh my goodness. Well, God showed me absolute unconditional love at my accident. I want to show that to my son, because that's not what I showed him last time. Okay. And if you're in a place of unconditional love toward your cheeky little teenage son, what would you do? I'd have a nice, calm conversation. So 2 weeks later, and guys, you got to write this stuff down. You can write it on your notes, because you got to pre-experience it or you'll never change it in the moment. I've studied habits and the neuroscience of habits and leadership. This is how you do it. So 2 weeks later, I'm looking out there, grass is long again. And I looked at Michael and I said, and I was trying to be super nice because I didn't want to conflict. I'm like, hey, buddy, lawn's lawn again. Can you mow it today? He didn't even look up from his phone this time. He just goes, no. Right there, right? All the habits, the path, boom, happen like, nope, this is my chance to mentor my son. I need to love him. I'm going to love you, son, unconditionally. Take a breath. And I sit down next to him very calmly. And I said, Michael, when you said no, what did no mean? He goes, well, I got hockey, and I got 2-a-days, and I got to pick a volley. And he goes, Dad, there's no way I can do the lawn today. Duh. Oh, yeah, guys, yeah, right? Like I had to recenter and walk the path right there in the moment. And I said, well, Michael, when you say no, when I ask you to do chores and you say no, I said, here's something I notice, right? You kind of do this with your coaches and a girlfriend, and I know you wish you had some better friends. I think this could be part of it. We had this amazing conversation. But at the end of it, though, here's what he said to me. He goes, I said, how would you like me to ask? He goes, Dad, you know what? You hate when people come up to you and tell you what to do. And you react the exact same way. I've seen mom tell you to do something instead of asking, and you get all bent. Fair. I said, you know what I did right there on the spot? I apologized to him. I said, Michael, you're right. I do that. And that is not okay. And would you forgive me, or when you can, would you forgive me for demanding things of you? And then I said this, I said, Michael, I give you permission to hold me accountable, that if there's chores to be done, and they do need to be done, but we have a conversation, we do it in a way that builds our relationship. And I said, is there anything else you want to share? And he said, no, but that conversation started healing our relationship to the point that 2 years later, when he got a classmate pregnant, when he was being pressured in a Christian school to have an abortion because they knew he would get expelled for violating the honor code, that he came to his mother and I. That's why we have a grandson. So God can do miracles in relationship. God is a God of restoration. In Psalms 23, when he says, I'm going to restore your soul, the original meaning of restore is to make better than new. He wants to do that with you and your relationships and your marriages and the relationships you have with your kids and on and on and on. That is the kind of God we serve. Unbelievable. All right? Thank you, guys.